what we're trying to do is to create a level playing field. What is a smart multi-generational neighborhood? Why do we even call it a smart multi-generational neighborhood? It's because it's what it says on the tin. It's really designed to be pretty simple for something which is incredibly complex, so that we can create over 10 years a conversation like this, where you've got experts from different perspectives through different lenses talking the same language. Do you notice that? They are communicating with you. You're asking questions that relate. We've got McCarthy Stone actually planning with the standard in mind. We've got Bupa thinking about it at a serious level. This is what it's about. It's very, very slow, but collectively we come to a point where we do have a common currency, if you will, that will allow the individual challenges that these experts are addressing. That's the other thing. We are greater than the sum of its. The standard is greater than the sum of its parts because of the people that you're seeing today and the people who have come together over the past 10 years to create this framework. That gives that common excellence that has been created with a spirit of open innovation. And each and every person in the room, if you think about this in a way that actually could be beneficial after the fact, it's an organic process. You share it back, you share it with your own communities, and you come back to us and say, do you know what, we've got an idea, maybe we can develop it from there. But you're all catalysts or agents of change as far as I'm concerned. So thank you. I think I've played for time enough. Thank you very much, Philippa. So whilst the panel is moving its way back across here, we're going to, where are we going to? Is it Washington? We're going to sunny America somewhere because our next speaker, Tim Ferriss, Dr. Tim Ferriss, who's the Vice President of Healthcare Practice at InterSystems. If we can bring him up, Claire. There he is. Dr. Tim Ferriss, who was previously, what were you, Dr. Tim Ferriss, previously, with an American accent?
You would like me to answer that question?
I thought it would be better that you would answer that.
The Director of Transformation in the NHS, reporting to the Health Secretary and the CEO of NHS Safety.
There you go. So, Tim is a transition point in terms of our next panel discussion, which is operationalizing the art of the possible. How do we productize smart multi-generational neighborhoods? How do we make them tangible in the real world? Well, we have been working at that behind the scenes, and our lead technology partner is InterSystems. You're going to hear more about what we've been doing with them shortly, but if you guys want to, yeah, it's fine. But we'll start off with Tim, who's he's as I say, it's this translation point. I'm actually intrigued as to his history. He's discussed it with me briefly before, but if you could take a few minutes, Tim, to contextualize your interest in transforming the NHS and now InterSystems.
Ian, thank you. And it's an honor to be with you. I'll just make a couple of overarching statements. First, I should say, how am I in this? Well, as a physician working in an inner city in Boston, Massachusetts, I was increasingly interested in the delivery of health services to underserved populations. And as my career advanced, I was more and more concerned about the mismatch between the need for health services and social care services and the supply of those services. The aging of the population has really highlighted the growth in the disparity between the supply of services and the need for those services. And I became increasingly interested in working at larger and larger scale because those were the places where we were going to make progress on this mismatch. So that's been the animating force behind my research, my publications, and my interest in the NHS. Because in addition to attending graduate school in England, I've had a long-time relationship with many physicians and public health officials. So I spent 3 years working in the NHS, and maybe during question and answer, I'm happy to talk about some of the work we did. But for example, the NHS app, which allows the citizens of England to see all of their records independent of what proprietary system holds those records. That's a critical example of interoperability among lots of different data systems, all involved in the delivery of health services. Still significant opportunity to improve those services, but headed in the right direction. So then let me turn and just say that most of us would prefer to be in our community, our neighborhood, as long as possible. I certainly would. And I love the name of the agile aging. I now, since I learned about that name from Ian, it's been my personal spot on the wall. I would like to be an agile ager, and will work for that personally. But the aging of the population is putting even more pressure on the health and care workforce, because let's call it like it is inefficient to deliver services when they're delivered in the home. I'll just say it's much more efficient if people came to a central location, an office, a hospital, social care services, where the people dispensing services have the supplies they need, the information they need. And yet, there's no question that if we are going to meet this supply-demand mismatch, we are going to meet the expectations of our older adults. We will need to use digital monitoring and data interoperability to extend the health and care services into the home. Full stop. The question then is, let's get practical. It's a very easy statement to make. It's a difficult problem to solve. Several people I noticed on our previous panel used the word trust. So I use the word monitoring intentionally, because monitoring has both positive and negative connotations. And if we're going to use monitoring to enable elderly to be in their homes for delivery of preventive services, for early intervention, for the use of AI, then we are going to need to trust that monitoring, that monitoring is put to uses that are going to help us and not hurt us. Second, monitoring requires interoperability. So, like it or not, the proprietary data systems used in used by different social care organizations, used by different health care organizations, all have, by requirements, have locked their data inside for good reason, cybersecurity, privacy, security. The question is, can we build infrastructure that allows not the sharing of data, I'm going to be a little bit more specific in my language, but appropriate access to the data at the moment that access is required. The technology necessary to do that exists. This is not a technological problem. This is a political and business challenge. But the interoperability is a requirement because for these different systems to talk to each other, we have to overcome the barriers, interoperability. So that's number two. Trust is number one, interoperability number two. And then it's not just monitoring, you actually need an effector arm. It's not good enough to say, oh, I know that Mrs. Smith in this particular neighborhood, Bishopsgate, wherever it is has fallen. You actually have to be able to do something about it. You have to be able to deliver preventive services. You have to intervene early. This is where AI provides, again, an extraordinary opportunity. I've been now working in my role at InterSystems since I left the NHS, building AI agents that literally help people, that act on behalf of people to intervene at an early time. I can get into examples of how that works specifically, but let me just stay at the high level for now and say, I want to just conclude by talking about how to make change. And this kind of change, the scale that we're talking about, requires driver projects. And I heard your prior panel mention some really interesting driver projects. I wrote some down that I hadn't heard of. But we need to demonstrate that we can be effective in delivering this trusted monitoring, this interoperability, this effector arm in the home. And we need to be able to show, especially politicians who are responsible for the public purse, that there is an ROI. I'll just tell you, in my role, I spent a lot of time in number 10 and testifying for Parliament. There's a huge amount of skepticism that there is an ROI on these kinds of programs. And I think that skepticism is justified because there has been a lot of money poured into similar sounding initiatives without getting the robust return that was hoped for and expected. So we need some big public wins, and I don't mean big in the number of people, but we need some demonstrations that clearly show that everything that this group has been talking about is achievable in a practical way in a realistic time frame. So I'm going to leave it there. I thank you very much for inviting me, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Tim. Long day. If we could ask Azim and Linda to introduce themselves before we go on to John and James, who will offer a continuum of that. So if you could set the scene in terms of your own interests.
So I'm Azim Majid. I'm Professor of Primary Care and Public Health at Imperial College London. I'm also an NHS GP and public health consultant. So I have interest in areas like prevention, diagnosing, managing long-term health conditions, and using medical records to drive improvements in health quality and public health. So the work of this ISO fits in very well with my broader aims in terms of its trying to integrate communities, improve well-being, improve mobility, etc. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Great, thank you. My name is Linda Chandler. I've been involved with this initiative for a long time, and I very proudly have Neighbourhoods of the Future as a book on my bookshelf, and I've kept it for a long, long time. I'm really interested in, it's fascinating to see that it's come to a standard, and I know there's a lot of hard work that's gone behind that, but I'm interested in adoption. Standards are nothing without adoption. We cannot operationalise the technology without people adopting the standards. I do two main things. I'm a co-founder of a tech startup. We're an audio wayfinding startup that connects people and place. But I'm also a strategic advisor around digital place. And those two things go hand in hand. On the one hand, we create smart technology and devices to bring to places, but the places need to respond. This whole idea about a cognitive architecture, places need to be smart to marry those things together, to work on behalf of the individual and on behalf of the business models as well. My journey builds on decades of technology and bringing the built environment into that. I led on smart cities for Microsoft globally in the UK and APAC. And then I've also been in the real estate sector where I was Chief Digital Officer for Olympia. So how do you take a real estate development and take it into the 21st century using technology? So I'm really interested in how all of this comes together around people and place and how we actually get projects moving.
So we have experts again, and diverse experts. The whole thing's been about diversity. I want to give you an insight as to what this could look like in reality. So I'm going to ask John and James to do a double act. How they're going to do that, I'm not sure. They've been rehearsing.
I'm going to kick off.
Very good.
So hopefully we've got some slides. There we are. So I'm James Ormond. This is John Payne. Thank you, Ian. Thanks for inviting us to be part of this journey. So we've got the pleasure of introducing you to both InterSystems and the Neighbourhood Health Architecture, or Neighbourhood Open Health Architecture, NOAA today. The core idea of that is really pretty straightforward. It's about harnessing interoperable data. And we've been talking a lot about interoperability all throughout the day, and Tim touched on it, and I'm sure we'll speak about it in a bit more. About trustworthy AI, that word trust again. And my laptop has just died. Oh, that's back. That was lucky. Slight panic. And all of that underpinned by a digital infrastructure to enable better, more connected support for people in their neighbourhoods. So all of this is, as we've been talking about all day, is about helping older adults live well, independently and safely for longer, while giving communities, providers and the voluntary sector the systems and the insight they need to coordinate care more effectively. So the fastest growing global demographic is the 65 plus age group. I'm glad David's gone now, because I was now worried about mentioning 65. If he's still here, I would have got a bit of stick. But I'm fast approaching the 65, so I feel vaguely safe in that. And by 2050, that global 65 plus population is expected to reach around 1.5. That's global, with most of that growth in low and middle income countries. In Europe, that figure will be 27% of the population by 2050. So obviously that demand is reshaping health, care, housing and community infrastructure. So the question now is no longer whether systems need to adapt. Actually, I wrote this and I thought the question is no longer whether systems need to adapt, how quickly and how practically they can do so. I'm not sure whether our systems can adapt or whether we need new systems. And that's probably something for me to think about, and maybe we can talk about a bit later on. So we've got a multifaceted challenge, and it's siloed. This is a siloed problem. Our systems are all designed to be vertical. So everything, if you think about all our patient record systems, all our systems in health and care, they're all that way. They're all siloed, they're all vertical. They're not horizontal. And if we're going to support multidisciplinary team working or multi-generational neighbourhoods, we need horizontal systems. We need systems that are going to lie down, because otherwise we will have gaps, which is what we have now. Those vertical systems at handover leave gaps and are barriers to that multidisciplinary team type working, to that handover process. So we've got people living longer, often with far more complex needs. Right now in the UK, our health and care system face huge workforce pressures, which I think we're all aware of, rising costs, fragmented services, and whilst navigating probably one of the biggest organisational changes in certainly health, and it will be social care as well, which was the abolishment of the NHS England. So we're seeing significant numbers of older adults experiencing unmet care needs, long waiting lists, growing pressure on public services. And this is a global challenge that needs practical, adaptable solutions that can also work locally. So it's a coordinated response. Led by Agile Ageing Alliance, the ISO provides a really common global standard for smart multi-generational neighbourhoods. Hopefully it will help bring together the health, the care, housing, technology, research, and probably many other organisations and interested parties around a common shared framework. And the aim very much is to move from isolated initiatives to repeatable models. I don't know about you, but in my career I've seen many examples, and we have them right now, particularly in the shared care record world, of great practice, but it's not repeatable. It works in one place, and it works brilliantly in one place. So there's a great example, Berkshire, for example, superb, but it doesn't pick up and work elsewhere. Why? Why is that? Because it's not the technology. I think it's down to about the individuals, but anyway. So we need that common standard to turn that into a practical path for delivery. So we hope NOAA will bring that to life. An AI-enabled operating system for multi-generational neighbourhoods. And it's connecting three hubs. First, the home hub. So that's supporting in-home monitoring, assertive technologies, medications, safety, and social connection. Then the second is the community hub, creating a neighbourhood intelligence layer for coordination and shared insight. And then third, the neighbourhood digital twin, which brings together data on health, care demand, housing, mobility, and risk. And the value of all of this is one architecture facilitating multiple use cases. Because I think one thing we've all heard from what we've seen this morning, and certainly from what I've seen in my day-to-day life and career, is there are use cases are twisted. They're all slightly different. There's a geographic flavour, there's a people flavour, there's something slightly different. But the use cases are common, and they need to be able to pick up and be able to shift and be able to move alongside shared standards. And that's where the ISO is so important in this. The ISO is the shared standard. That's the commonality that will drag all of these different systems together. So there is no way a single organisation can deliver this alone. NOAA, like so much in health and care, is about collaboration. We need collaboration. Standards leadership from Agile Ageing Alliance, technical architecture research from Imperial College London, secure interoperability from ourselves at InterSystems, and then multiple delivery partners, cross-local authorities, care providers, housing and innovation. And all of these partners bring a different capability, excuse me, but together we can create conditions for practical implementations at scale. So why us? Why InterSystems? Well, we're a trusted health infrastructure. A trusted health infrastructure. We've been around for over 45 years now, supporting mission critical systems, data systems, and more than 1 billion health records are managed globally, along with a very significant footprint here in the UK and I. We have hospital systems, electronic patient records. We have shared care records. We also bring an interoperability capability, including support for HL7 and FHIR standards. Again, standards are so key to this. Providing integration across diverse systems and settings in over 130 organisations, who across the NHS use our technology to manage interoperability between disparate systems in both health and care. And then importantly, as a founder-led, privately held organisation, we take a long-term view aligned with public purpose healthcare, and very much the success of our customers is key to what we do. So that's my bit, the first half. The next bit is over to my one-armed bandit friend.
Okay. Thanks, James. All right, so James has set the scene and worked on that. So I'm going to briefly try and flesh this out a little bit without going into too much detail, and shout if I do, because I tend to talk tech when I get carried away. But the next stage, which is what NOAA is all about, is really about gathering evidence for the standard, gathering evidence to support the work that's been done in the standard to date, to be able to show to governments, to institutions, to companies building housing, to whoever might be interested, that the premises behind 25553 are practical, useful, adaptable, valuable, and will help move society forward. Now, that's based around this idea of a cross-sector ecosystem. James talked about partnership, about people, organisations from many different types being involved in this. And that's really crucial to develop the demonstrators, because they have to be done in a way that supports the idea that this concept is scalable, it's sustainable, and it helps improve the quality of life for the citizens within which are going to be supported. In practice, I mean this graphic has the idea of a home hub and a neighbourhood health hub. If you read the standard, there's concepts of community in there. Practically, are these going to be different pieces of software or different services? We're not, to a degree, I think that's not necessarily important at this stage. I think what is important is to view these as context for viewing, consuming, generating, using, encapsulating, taking advantage of data. And that data may be oriented or developed or delivered from a home setting. It could be from wearables, it could be from algorithms looking at the way the Wi-Fi signals are being modulated. It could be data from a smart device such as a fridge or a smart toilet. It could be from somebody in the home interacting with a smart device. Whereas in the neighbourhood, it could be looking at services that are from that neighbour or associated with the neighbourhood, whether it's transport, like going back to an example this morning, bus timetabling, or it could be logistics about food or services being delivered. It could be about consumption of services such as electricity, looking at the patterns of behaviour based on consumption of electricity. But then it can be branching out from there to incorporate not just the physical surroundings, but also the health and care world. And so incorporating and taking advantage of data from a client environment within social care or from a health environment within healthcare, being able to support the individual in the home to make decisions about what they want to do. And it's very pertinent. I'm probably one of the older people in this room at the moment. I'm not quite 75 yet, but I'm heading that way. So I've got a very specific perspective on this. I want my interaction with these devices to be seamless, to be easy, to be accessible, for me to make decisions about my life in a very seamless manner, without needing to worry about the technology. So it has to be transparent to the citizen in their home. Whereas on the professional side, it needs to be informative, it needs to be pertinent, it needs to be appropriate and rapid, and it needs to be supported by technology and AI in a way that's useful. So understanding the signal from the noise, particularly with, for example, lots of streaming data being generated from a multitude of devices, then being able to understand what's important versus what's prevalent. And based on a platform that's secure, that's interoperable, that enables robust governance, and that can orchestrate the data flows and the interactions with people in a way that then can be capitalised on, taken advantage of by the people who want to be able to or can deliver additional value. You know, the researchers from Fraunhofer who want to build AI agents to help different aspects of people's health and well-being, for example. So this is really what NOAA is about, is developing this architecture and enabling demonstrators rapidly to prove the value and to iterate, because you never get these things right to start off with. So where's it heading? From a personal perspective, to support an individual, moving away from just what you can get from an Apple Watch or a Fitbit to a neighbourhood scale intelligence, I think is a great way to summarise it. And that's enabled by connecting the various devices and having conversations with people in the home, ending up in a position where you can easily, robustly raise signals to health and care professionals, where when somebody's going to visit a health and care professional, they can see useful and valuable information about that person rather than home-generated data being dismissed as irrelevant or unnecessary or unimportant. And where we can streamline the move from identification of an incipient problem or a potential problem coming in the future through to preventive action. And making it personal. I think this is the most important thing, that is personal to me, that is personal to you. That perspective of what's being put forward in terms of we need to take action in this particular area. It has to be presented in a way that's relevant and personal to the individual. Otherwise, it's going to be dismissed as it's not relevant, it's intrusive, it's monitoring rather than support and assistance. So how is this done? So we have the platform, we have the trustworthy platform which consumes the data and manages it in a way which is appropriate and serves it into this agentic ecosystem. So then the NOAA architecture really is designed to, or is intended to be designed to facilitate this adaptive environment whereby we can construct a set of agents that deliver value, that will tell people the important things that are going on, or will help people achieve the important things in their life. Because we can not only use the NOAA architecture to improve people's health and well-being. We can do more operational type tasks, such as, for example, you can look at scheduling when to run a washing machine to take advantage of cheap electricity. To take a very simple example, one of the big costs of running a modern home is, when the electricity costs for the dishwasher and the washing machine and the tumble dryer, if you've got that, and if you can just have them run automatically at a time when electricity is either free or a quarter of the price at peak rate, then that can be a big advantage if you're living on a restricted budget and you need to use those devices because it's hard for you to do the washing up or hang the washing on the line. So being able to take advantage of this sort of assistance in many facets of people's lives, I think is an important place that we get to. So the trusted governance has been touched on a number of times. And that's enabled by being able to exchange data from many different devices, across many different settings, many different organizations in a secure manner, being able to manage consent. You know, people saying, yes, I'm willing to share my data, or yes, I'm willing to allow somebody to help me based on that data, to ensure that, and that's supported by being able to audit what's happened to that data, who's had access to it, who's seen it, where it might be used, where there's clear accountability for oversight. I mean, I've seen a number of organisations really getting to scratching their heads when there's been a problem with some data, and it's a question, well, who's responsible for that data leak, or who's responsible for that misuse of that data? And there's a lot. Invariably, there's a whole row of people all pointing fingers at each other, and that's because it's not really clear. The data use policies may not be properly exacted. The data ownership, the data. So we need to have clarity about who's responsible for what, where, and when, and to have that embodied within the platform and within the systems that use that. And if you have that, then that's one of the key things that get you towards an environment that is trusted by people. And then the last piece that's worth mentioning here is standards alignment. Invariably, when people start to work in what's proposed as a new domain, and I would say, there's very few really new domains. There's retreading the old ones, and there's a lot of reuse in this one. But where people start to work in a new domain, or see a new domain occurring, and you could say that could be applied to smart multi-generational neighbourhoods, invariably there's a whole host of people who want to make a novel industry out of it and become the experts. I think we need to try and avoid that happening in the work around NOAA and the work around 25553. There's more than enough standards out there already in terms of how you move data around, or how you control access, or how you might look for granting consent or managing consent. I think what we need to do with NOAA is to align to those existing standards and use them effectively. And if we do that, if we manage that coordination correctly, then that will accelerate the delivery of value from the development and deployment of the NOAA architecture. And okay, I think we've got to the. Is there another one? I thought there was, but there we go. Pressing the button and it wasn't doing anything. All right, so coming towards the end, because I'm running out of time. To sum up, it's all about creating demonstrators that provide evidence, that show how it delivers value, shows that it can scale, and develops a knowledge base for part 2 and part 3 that can be taken advantage of and used effectively, not just in what we might do in the context of projects with Greenwich or other organisations like that, but in the context globally of what's going on in the US with regards to rural health, what's going on in many other countries who are facing similar challenges, and can leverage what the work that the early demonstrators do. All right, I'll stop there because I think we're really at the point where hand over.
Thank you very much.
I think I've talked too much as it is.
Thank you. Very complex, very technical, but actually understandable. And whilst I know it was your passion, John, and you got into it, you articulated it in a way that pretty much anyone could understand, even if they weren't looking to. Those that wanted to discover how the standard can be translated into the real world, that was very clear, and that's thanks to you and to James. Questions of the broader sense. One short point, very important in respect of multiple standards. This is a framework. So there are other standards out there which are all compatible. And what this is designed to do is to accommodate those, is to connect the dots between the right standards. That's a very important point that you made there that I just want to reiterate. So, microphone, please.
So talking of standards, this week we've heard NICE developing stand. Sorry, do you want me to start again? That's not me. This week we've heard that NICE colleagues are developing standards for the technologies in people's homes for adult social care in the same way as they might have done for the NHS. So I think to your point, Ian, this is another standard, but there are other things going on, and we're involved in that work with NICE. So I just wondered how that connection might be enabled by these conversations as well.
The colleagues, who would like to respond to that?
I'm happy to have a go.
Go for it.
So thanks. So I think NICE sets standards for health and care in England and Wales, so it's very good they're developing and thinking about this topic as well, because it's often been neglected in the past. The thing about NICE is once the standards are set, those are then used by the NHS across England and Wales to commission and fund health services, and by frontline staff to implement those services. So I think it's an excellent step, and hopefully we'll see some positive change from this guidance. NICE does have a very rigorous methodology for this kind of work. They'll do evidence synthesis, public consultation, etc., before producing final guidance. So it is a very rigorous process, but it is seen as a gold standard, I think, globally in terms of evidence synthesis in healthcare.
I think I'll just add something to that, which is BSI are our sponsor because this ISO is within the UK, and therefore it has to be sponsored by BSI, and they're, if you like, a partner in it. They also have standards in development which are complementary to what we're talking about, because we're looking to the future. We're looking at standards that will be required from AI being part of the mainstream. And so it comes back to what I was saying just before. Realistically, what we're trying to create is a common vernacular, really, that is recognized as the global gold standard, ISO, in that regard. And NICE should be able to fit right into that in a complementary way. And what we want to ensure is, as we work up these use cases, that they help to show how these various works in progress can come together, singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak. Other questions, please?
Thank you. Does there need to be a certain scale for these demonstrator projects? I mean, I'm wondering, it all sounds absolutely wonderful. Would people who move in to one of these neighbourhoods need to consent to their data being used? Could they say, I don't want to be part of KnowHer? Would there be a service charge implication? Because you've obviously got higher electricity usage because of the AI. So do a new development using this need to have access to more electricity? We've seen the controversy about some of the data centres and understating their electricity requirements. So it's really just scale, cost implications for potential demonstrator projects to consider.
The scale question is a good one, because it's one that we had to take into account when designing the standard. We were looking for exemplars, and we found little pockets of innovation specific to green space, for example. In America, some fantastic, really innovative examples, but they weren't neighborhood scale, but they were good enough, and we were able to translate them to inform the development of specific clauses. And I think the same thing applies as we evolve the standard, and that's the primary thing here. Specific to NOAA, we haven't defined the business case. I think it's quite interesting because James is head of sales for a global organization that has a way of selling software normally. But because this is a process of consultation, we don't have all the answers. So consequently, it will be informed by the needs of the likes of Greenwich, for example. Do you want to expand on that a little?
Yeah, well, I think you've covered most of it. I mean, the commercial models for these will depend on the scope and the scale of what we end up with. I don't think we're yet clear on what we're talking about, but invariably, most of these models are wrapped into a subscription model, a revenue model, and they're based around some form of sizing, some form of scaling, which allows us to go up and go down. Until we understand more about what this looks like, I'm not sure what that's going to be. But I think if you talk about an individual's contribution, it will be tiny. And as to whether they opt in or opt out, that's going to come down to the operating models that they're going to be adapted by whomever the owner of the legal owner of this facility, whatever that may be. So again, I think people can opt in and opt out as they can now, but how those would look, I think it's all work for us to do, isn't it, Ian?
It is. I think that Linda wants to say something, but it is definitely an opt-in scenario. Nobody is going to be forced, and we're not going to impose this.
No.
It comes back to the conversation that was being had earlier in terms of what Philippa was saying regarding the narrative, the stories. People need to understand what's good about it. You know, we had an insight with telling that story. If it had just been presented as a technical proposition, it would have been a switch off. But we want to create the examples, and that's why this next period is so important. Linda?
Thanks. I think we should learn from the area of smart cities in all of this. And it's a cautionary tale, but it's also, I think, shows us the path forward. I've been involved in smart cities for many, many years, and there are many, many standards around smart cities. Are they adopted? And sadly, the answer is largely no. And to one of scale, when I was at Microsoft, we worked with very large cities, but actually we also work with very small cities as well, and communities. And in fact, people often ask me, where is the smartest place that you've worked? And actually, perhaps smart towns in Wales, who've got a very great community and a network, and they're sharing. So while I really agree with the standards, I feel that we've kind of we've leapt from the need and being in people's homes and the caring aspect to this sudden big AI infrastructure piece, and I'd like to kind of push that a little bit into the background and lead on the need, because while I think there's a lot of good framework and there should be some top down, I think there's an awful lot of bottom up, and actually the most successful places that adopt, they do it on a bottom up use case. We don't start with a neighbourhood digital twin, we build up data use cases of what the community needs.
Absolutely, yeah. Good POCs to build your use case.
But I would also say we're in a time of immense technological change. So I worry about waiting for demonstrators and proving, because all the startups are going to be doing this. So corralling them towards the standard, I think, is and developing the ecosystem. You asked whether actually, we should develop new systems or I think we've got lots of systems, we've got lots of great data.
No, that's a very good point.
It's about adapting that into an agentic world.
Yeah, true.
Claire, is Tim still there? If he is, we'd like to bring him in on the conversation. He might be hidden behind the words. Azim, do you have...
just to add to that, I think in health and care, we see lots of innovations locally which are not scaled up. So you see good ideas and they just fade away because no one takes them up nationally.
Yeah.
So what you tend to see is opposite of that. Someone nationally has an idea which is rolled out across England, and often it's not a great idea, and there are better ideas locally, but we don't manage to identify those ideas and really scale and invest in them, so they then work nationally as well as locally. So I think that's one of the failings of the NHS is lack of local innovation, which is then scaled up nationally rather than what we tend to see, which is the other way around, where it comes to the top and just rolled out everywhere, despite what the local environment is.
Yeah, national programme.
I think that's a good point, but the difference between a smart city and what we're doing is smart city had something to sell. It was a specific concept. We're calling this smart because basically it's easier for people to understand than intelligent. But it is about a multi-generational neighborhood enabled by technology in the broadest sense. And there are, as we all know, myriad solutions that are being created. You're going to be hearing from Chris from Innovate UK shortly, and he has been partially responsible for supporting probably thousands of solutions, many of which don't see the light of day because they might be very innovative and they could change lives, but they're having to compete with major companies. And do people trust them? It comes back to that word, trust. So again, I think in this context, what we're doing is trying to promote trust. And this is an example of what could be developed with a public service agenda. So that's really important. The idea is this could potentially help some of those solutions to go to market because it becomes the trusted infrastructure. Is Tim still here? No. Any other questions?
So, having recently fought with two systems which claim to operate the same standard and trying to get them to integrate together from a technical perspective, the idea of multiple standards sends a shudder down my spine. Back to the point about trust, I think what you have to have is you have to build an architecture that allows people to have choices which they can make based upon being well informed about what's going to happen. Who is this broker that needs to look at my data? Why do they want to look at it? And that's quite a difficult thing to do if the data standard that's being presented to somebody who may not be technical provides two different views. How are they going to take that apart? Somehow they have to develop their own trust in it. This business of, I don't want to share my data is perfectly understandable. You have to get them to a position where they understand exactly what it is that they're going to get. And it has to be something they can then understand how they control. Getting to a position where you can do that, where you have potentially different ways of exchanging data is quite tough. And it's probably the one bit where you have to be quite rigid as an ISO standard is to actually develop a way of blessing in appropriate ways of exchanging data so that it looks consistent. Because if it starts to look inconsistent, like the systems I was dealing with a few weeks ago, it's going to be very difficult. That was just an exchange between two systems, but we're talking about millions of people. So it has to be very clear to them. So somehow you're going to have to pin that down in the technical underpinnings of this concept.
And that's why we have brilliant experts like John, who have been living and breathing this to respond to that point.
Okay. In some ways I agree with what you're saying. In some ways I slightly disagree. I mean, I think that one of the attractions about the richness of the availability of particularly home devices. There is so many, and there's so much innovation going on, that it's, I think, difficult to be completely prescriptive about how the data from those devices, which, there's a new one being invented every week, may be made available in terms of what does that data look like. And I think we've seen an illustration of that happen in the home health device market. So for a period of time, there was general agreement in the market, I'd say general, loose agreement in the market from a number of suppliers that they were going to converge on a particular format called FHIR, F-H-I-R, from an organisation called HL7 for the back-end presentation of that data, so it could be more easily consumed by an individual with they're on their phone or whatever it might be, or by a back-end service organisation. However, what we've seen in the past year or two is that now the device suppliers are diverging from that standard. And the reason that they're diverging from that standard is because the standard doesn't necessarily cover their use case in a particularly appropriate way. So I think you can be as prescriptive as makes sense, but to try and force all the home device manufacturers into one mould, I think is not going to work. I think what we can do is to put them into tranches and say different types of data may conform to different standards that are appropriate to the type and nature of the data that's involved in it. So I think if you've got healthcare data, then it's reasonable that it might be delivered in a FHIR format. But if you've got environment data, or you've got data that's less healthcare specific, it could be coming in another form. And I think that therefore to try and force everything into one specific mould would be overly restrictive. And there's technology platforms around that really sort of help with that data transformation in a variety of ways, and that's one of the things that we do a lot of work with. But there's not just ourselves. There's many other platforms out there that address that domain. So I don't think it's a technical challenge. I think the other aspect that you talked about, though, presenting choice to the citizen, to the individual, is probably the biggest challenge, and that I think is not so much is not a technical problem. I think it's a social problem.
I think it's a very good point. You talk about FH7. You may recall that's how we were introduced, i.e. FH7 is very technical, and the head or second head of that standard for Europe saw that it would be complementary to what we were attempting to achieve with smart multi-generational neighborhoods. And I think the difference is, I'm just thinking while you're talking, I think the difference is one is a standard and one is a movement. Really, we've created a movement. It goes beyond the technical aspect of it. There are enough people in different sectors believing in it, wanting to make it a reality because they can see the benefits. Now, you could compare this. There's one in America called, what's it called? Amory, the American one. Okay, there's a standard, but it's commercial. Companies are paying towards it to make a common.
Standard association.
No, it doesn't matter. It's got a name, and the point is, companies pay to belong to it with a view to making it more attractive to the public. That's another way of doing it, having a collective responsibility. What we're attempting to do here, the comparison I give, is PBS or the BBC. When commercial television started, if it were not for PBS, if it were not for BBC, today we'd have wall-to-wall advertising, that's all you would get. So what we're trying to do here is to create something that's got civic responsibility, that actually has an agenda, that it's intent on doing good. I mean, that sounds a bit corny, but it's the reality. And the people who have contributed to it have a similar perspective. And so consequently, there is a reason why these other standards would want to gather, join forces and actually make an impact. And then you create the stories around it, as we've been saying all day. You know, there has to be a narrative. Media has to take an interest in it as well. There's a question for you, Linda, in terms of how you would get consumers, given what you were saying earlier on, to want to engage, to actually take an interest in, not necessarily Noah, but in the broader scheme of things?
I mean, that's a really good question, I think, and not one that we've totally solved in terms of smart place or digital place. If I can give you an example of how we're going about it in terms of my startup, Spatial Sound, we're starting to think along the lines of an AI wayfinding assistant. So again, projecting ourselves into the future, thinking about what's the honest broker that works on our behalf? Because in the big tech world, whenever we sign up for systems, I think we're all realizing that actually those algorithms work on behalf of the business model of whoever supplies those to us. And so as we start to awaken to that, and that's not to say, you know, there shouldn't be commercial ventures out there, and we should understand that value exchange. So I think it's more about how do we make that transparent? So we either pay for a service and a subscription, and we understand we're paying for that, or we're getting something for free, and we understand that there's a business model on the back of that. And we just need that transparency. So the way that we're starting to think about AI agents is, you know, are they free to consumer? Is it something that works on your behalf? Or do you actually pay for privacy? You know, should it be this privacy-centric model? But is there a business model about, you know, when you go out and connecting people and place? Is there, and I was talking about this with Tom earlier, you know, do you start to say, I'm going to give you some information about me for an hour while I'm in your district, and allow the businesses and the services, the agentic place, to discover that and to give me fair value exchange. Come and have a free coffee in my new coffee shop. You know, I might welcome that, but I don't necessarily want to give you all my data for, you know, the rest of my life. So I think it's a difficult one. I think it's about understanding from that personal point of view what the value exchange, what am I getting? Am I fueling your business model with my data? Fine if I'm getting something free and I accept that. Or am I paying for a service that is just about me and my needs? Or am I getting that for free from somewhere and there's some other way of monetization?
I think that's a great
transparency.
I think that's a great point, and it reminds me of giving access to data at the airport. You want to use the Wi-Fi, you sign. You like it or you don't. It's simple as that. It's very similar.
Yeah.
Azim, final word from you, if I may. You've shared with me some incredibly deep reflections on the value from a citizen's perspective and your position, both in terms of your role within Imperial, but also as a practitioner. Could you just comment on that for me?
So I think improving health is not just about healthcare, it's about a much wider health determinants. Like we've seen discussed today, housing, mobility, connectivity, social interaction. So I think this ISO and the work linked with it really has great potential to address these wider health determinants and really improve people's health, their well-being, their quality of life, and what they can contribute towards society more generally. So I think it's a big step forwards, and it helps, move the focus away from just healthcare, which is only part of improving health. In fact, much of health status is influenced by these other factors rather than by medical care itself. So I think this encourages a wider way of thinking about optimising health and quality of life and people's, social awareness.
Thank you. We're talking about possibly having a follow-up forum before the end of the year specific to this area, to actually looking at what kind of technology could be used to realise the potential of the standard. And if you're interested, reach out to the Agile Aging Alliance, and we will invite you to that if it goes ahead, which is quite likely, I think. For now, I'd like to thank our panelists for a really interesting session, not an easy one to convey, and so if I could ask you to join me. And 10 minutes for a cup of tea or coffee, and we'll reconvene at 4 o'clock. And we have a really, really interesting discussion for you coming up. Thank you.